Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm Tony Sertich and I will be your host again for the 52nd season of this program. Our show each week will feature lawmakers representing districts in northeastern Minnesota talking about events and legislation at the state capitol. The makeup of the legislature has changed this session, with the Democrat Farmer Labor Party having control of both the House and the Senate following the November election. The result has been a quick pace, and many DFL-sponsored bills passed are on the fast track. With a historic budget surplus, important decisions are yet to be made on funding in specific budget areas and what kind of bonding bill will be passed. We encourage viewers to call with your questions for lawmakers. The phone number will be on your screen, or send an email to ask@wdse.org. We have one of our region's newest lawmakers on our first show of season 52. Representative Natalie Zeleznikar is a Republican from Fredenberg Township, representing Minnesota House District 3B. Welcome, Representative. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start by getting to know you a little bit. You're a brand new lawmaker. What drove you to run for office?
You know, I was running facilities, assisted living, and spent my life caring for seniors as a nursing home administrator and CEO, and spent about 2 years at Frozen Windows, during the pandemic, with seniors not being able to say goodbye to their kids and their adult children, and it was devastating. And I realized it was harder than going through 8 surgeries with breast cancer. And I wanted to make sure people were together, that we could move past the pandemic and really move forward for Minnesota.
Great. Well, it's been certainly a fast-paced session. Some bills have already passed and been signed into law. Mm-hmm. What do you think the most significant legislation that's already been passed has been thus far?
I think everybody would say, the first bill that was introduced was HF1, which was the abortion bill. I think that was, for the majority party, would say that was their biggest accomplishment. And I think, it is monumental in that it now replicates the most extreme side on the abortion side, which is China and countries like that. So I was hoping we'd have more of what the pro-choice people said, that they wanted to have Roe versus Wade, and now it's beyond that. So I think that's probably the most monumental bill I've seen.
Okay. And so you voted against it.
Yes.
Some of your concerns were?
Mm-hmm. One of the things were, having the ability to have abortion, to the 40th week, there was bills introduced for amendments to say, let's just have language where we're not going to do it in the 3rd trimester, that we're going to make sure we have care for babies if abortion is botched and the baby's living. We're going to be hearing that bill so that the baby receives care. And so those type of bills that are going through are highly disappointing, and I don't think reflect Minnesota values.
Okay. Well, we're certainly going to look for some questions from the audience, but I have a few off the top here for you. Budget targets have been set already, and for folks back at home, this is a step in the process where the legislature decides in big amounts how much money is going to be spent in each area: taxes, education, you name it, health and human services, all and down the list. What is your first take on the general numbers on where the priorities are being set by the majority parties in their budget targets?
That billions doesn't mean anything. Everything is in billion-dollar increments. And so we have $1 billion and $20 billion in surplus, and we have billions in every single line item in the budget process. So listening to that, it makes business operations and home checkbooks look like nothing. And so it's monumental, but at the end of the day, we still have to balance a budget. And right now, the budgets that are being proposed aren't going to be sustainable for the next 2-year biennium. So what they call that is money in the tails. And so we're spending all the surplus, and then we're also going to have unfunded mandates and policies that we're putting in place, which is really concerning to me.
What is your most concerning area of the unsustainability of the spending, either on the tax side or on the spending side?
I think there's a lot of concern. I mean, this last week there were articles about school districts that aren't going to be able to accomplish the goals of making sure kids can read in Minnesota. We have 50% reading literacy in the state of Minnesota, and so even with these funding mandates and unfunded things, school districts are saying, wait, these mandates are going to actually make us not get ahead of the game. We don't have the building space, so the mandates on class size, the mandates on making sure that we do all the things the state wants is going to put school districts in harm's way. And so that's one of the issues. And then healthcare is another thing. Nursing homes aren't funded. So there's 300 nursing homes in Minnesota, and we are only funding critical access nursing homes, and those are in greater Minnesota, and those are important. But we have several that are at risk of closure.
So you'd like to see more funding dedicated towards nursing homes?
Absolutely.
And where would that money come from, separate from where the proposals are? The three biggest pots of money really in the state budget goes to education, taxes, and health and human services. So where would you want to shift the money from in order to accomplish your goal of more funding for nursing homes?
I think it's a combination. I mean, I think absolutely one of the things is there's $1.6 billion of the surplus that's going as a one-time fee to fund as seed money the paid family medical leave policy, which is going to then have additional money come in through an employer mandate, and then they can decide if they want employees to pay any portion of that. So that's $1.6 billion that's sitting there in this formula that they're putting forward that I believe should be going to other things. And many people believe that. So that would be one thing that would be able to help baseline funding for some of the nursing homes at risk that incurred unsustainable costs by mandates through COVID.
Great. Please send in your questions, either call the number on the screen or send in an email to us. Another piece of leftover business from the last legislative session was a bonding or capital investment bill. And this is when the legislature and the governor borrow money, and you have to get a significant amount of votes, not just a majority, but a supermajority of legislators, to pay for investments in capital investments, buildings, and other things like that. That bill is making its way through the process, passed the House. I believe you voted against it.
I voted for it.
Oh, you voted for it. I'm sorry. You voted for it. Thank you for the correction. But in the Senate, the Republicans voted against it. And so where does that sit right now, and what are your hopes for making sure that your projects get invested in the capital investment bill?
The House called for the vote on the bonding, and so both Roger Scraba from 3B and myself from 3A, or he's 3A, I'm 3B, but we both voted in favor of the bonding. And part of the reason is that we have many projects that have been delayed for several years, and so those costs are going up, and we have many things that are really important for the state. And all the Republicans agree with that. I think what's happened, and I agree with the Senate's position is, look, we have all promised Minnesotans that we're going to have Social Security taxes eliminated. So that's the reality of what happens at the state of Minnesota. And I don't disagree with the Senate, saying, look, we're going to deal with bonding, but we're also going to not go back on our word, because we all said that we were going to make sure seniors were taken care of this session, and we should absolutely take care of seniors when we have a $20 billion surplus.
Great. And that's a great segue, because we got our first question from a viewer, and this is a perennial question we get almost every week, and it is on the Social Security tax. And so I saw that you're an author of elimination of the Social Security tax as well. And so where does that stand in the process right now? And what do you think the likelihood of success is for passing either a full repeal or a partial repeal of that tax?
I don't know. I would hope that it's going to be done. It's really disappointing to me. I guess I was naive to think we'd go into a trifecta. I thought that the Democrats would want this to, get rid of Social Security taxes for everybody in the state of Minnesota, and especially seniors. And so I wrote a bill that would actually be for the subtraction of taxes for public employees and people in that situation, and also for people that get Social Security tax, Social Security, regular Social Security, that tax would be eliminated. So I thought that we'd be hearing that bill, and it's been turned down. The Democrats have voted against it in the Senate and in the House more than once. So I'm waiting and hoping that we're going to get that done. I'm absolutely for having it eliminated.
And by voting against it, I believe I heard that that's a procedural vote to take on the issue immediately, but it's still being heard and considered in the tax committees.
Yes.
And is that correct?
My understanding, yes. It's at the Senate, and so the Senate will negotiate, and then they have to have a vote on it at the Senate, and hopefully the Democrats will start saying, yes, we're going to do Social Security tax, elimination and be serious about it so that we can deal with bonding.
Now, I know that some bills are being passed right now that spend money in the millions, and as you said, we're talking about billions of dollars here.
Right.
But generally, are we waiting to see that proposal along with all the other proposals come later in the session? You know, the viewers at home want to know when this is going to happen. Is it probably going to happen
It could happen
closer
right
to
now.
the end?
It could they have a trifecta. It could absolutely happen right now. It's about choice. And so it could happen. They're in the driver's seat. So if they want Social Security taxes to be eliminated, they would be able to make that go at record speed because everything else is won at record speed. Sure. So I don't doubt that it could happen very quickly. And I'm hoping it will, so we can address the bonding needs and the multiple other needs that we have, like getting taxes lower, getting businesses to come to our area, making sure we can have jobs and child care credits and many things like that for working families.
So are you supportive of putting the budget together piece by piece, just passing the legislation and then at the end seeing how much money you have left to fund the rest, or would you like to see the full picture before it goes forward?
Well, we've dealt with some bills individually, and then right now in the categories of the omnibus bills, they're going to come that way, and that's what I'm told of how they do it. So, you know, I'm not in a position where I get to make the rules, and especially not this year because we have no majority in the seat. So right now I can just listen at committee and then wait to see what's in the bill and then look to see what's in the bill because, you know, the details, the devil's in the details. So that's what I'm waiting to look at is line by line, what are the line items in there? And then, you know, are these the priorities of District 3B and the people that I represent?
Great, well, thank you. We got another email from a viewer here. Is there any progress on delivering a rebate to Minnesota taxpayers? And I believe this is an issue where Governor Walz called for one-time rebate checks to take some of the surplus, which isn't the ongoing money, to rebate back. And I know there's some proposals in the legislature to do something similar. What is the status of rebates back to taxpayers?
That's a very good question. I mean, we've been asking that at committee meetings all the time. And so, you know, the Republican proposal is $1,250 for individuals and $2,500 for joint filers. So people that paid into taxes would get that money back. And I'm hoping they're going to do that. I mean, my concern is the type of money we're seeing being spent and proposed in these budgets is using every bit of the $20 billion surplus plus taxing Minnesotans more. So the taxes are the budget's going up by 30% from what we've done in prior biennium. So this is going to be a huge tax burden increase for people in Minnesota. And my worry is, are the Social Security, are these checks going to come back? You know, give it back is what we've said. Give the money back to the people.
Great. Now, you're a first-term legislator, and you're in the minority.
I am.
What do you see your role being in passing legislation? Are you there to criticize? Are you there to collaborate? A little of both? How have you seen your role being a first-term legislator in the minority?
You know, I see myself as being a responsible leader. I was elected for the people. So whether I'm a minority party or majority party, my job is to work for the people, to be the voice for northeastern Minnesota, for Two Harbors, Rice Lake, you know, Hermantown, Proctor, and all the townships. And so regardless if we're in the majority, I'm going to work hard for the people here and make sure that they know what bills are being introduced. So I've been making it a priority to do town halls monthly, to be on radio, to, you know, write articles, to do, you know, as much as I can to let people know, because they're all busy working, raising their family, you know, doing responsible things, and they need somebody to give them a snapshot of what's happening, and then listening to what do people want? What do people want and what do they need in northern Minnesota?
Great. And you've introduced 12 bills so far, a lot of them local projects.
Correct.
Tax bills that we've talked about already, and a few on health care as well. Can you identify any of the bills that you hope, I'm assuming you hope all of them get across the finish line, but are some further along in the process? You
know, one of the things I've been working, I just talked to our Congressman Pete Stauber about, is I introduced a bill to have 16 and 17-year-olds be able to operate Hoyer lifts and sit-to-stand equipment in nursing homes and assisted livings, because we're in a workforce shortage, and right now OSHA requires 18. We can drive a car at 16, but I need to have federal waiver for that. So I've been working on that right now, and that will help alleviate. So sometimes it's mandates, sometimes it's policies, try to get things done to help people. And I'm also working with family child care providers on what they need to be able to have a family child care model that is financially feasible, because 700 child care providers have closed. And when you have shift work, you need to have child care that's family focused too.
Yes. And workforce is certainly a challenge that we're seeing, and you sit on the workforce committee. Are you seeing any promises and proposals coming through that'll help northeastern Minnesota with this workforce crunch?
You know, it's been fascinating because workforce has been my world, you know, for 40 years. And so it's working with DEED and understanding how all the pieces come together, and then...
And DEED, we don't do acronyms here on this show, so that's the Department of Employment and Economic Development, one of the state agencies.
Yes,
go
thank
ahead.
you.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. No, thank you, because I'm learning all these acronyms.
Yes.
And so, but it's been great to work to see, and that's what I'm looking for when we're looking at the workforce. One of the questions I'm asking is, what percentage of the funding is coming to northern Minnesota? How much of this is Metro, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and how much of this is for greater Minnesota? Because I don't want greater Minnesota left out of the puzzle. So one of the things, and that's why I like being on the committee, is I can make sure greater Minnesota is not forgotten.
Great, well, thank you. And let's keep those questions coming in. Please call or email any questions, and we'll get to them straight away. As you said, working in assisted living facilities, that is the other big crunch on both workforce, but helping our seniors with mandates, with all the regulation that goes into running those facilities. What are you seeing proposals? Because that's the other committee you sit on, is the Human Services Committee. So what are you seeing hopeful coming out of there that may help us in northeastern Minnesota?
One of the things I've been doing is meeting with the Minnesota Department of Health and Department of Human Services, meeting collaboratively with them, because what I learned when I got down there, which was shocking to me, is that during a pandemic, we fined assisted living's $3 million in the state of Minnesota and $1 million to nursing homes. So that meant that these providers had that large amount of money taken out of their cash reserves, and they already were struggling. And so now they're on credit lines, and I can see what happened. And so it seemed odd to me. We don't, do that in any other department. We have education at 30% proficiencies, but we're not fining teachers or fining, districts when they don't meet, 80, 90% proficiency rates. But we're doing that to nursing homes. When we set the rules and they've played by the game of what the state and federal government said to do, and we penalized them. And they didn't have staff, because you can't grow staff in a petri dish. And so, they were compromised. And so I'm trying to help build that back up so that we can get healthcare workers, get the health occupation classes back in high schools. I've been touring high schools around the state to see best practice models to get that in application, especially in greater Minnesota.
Great. The other committee you sit on are the Children and Families Committee. You've talked about child care, and we know that that is a major issue, especially in northeastern Minnesota. Governor Walz has actually proposed a brand new agency that focuses solely on early childhood. What are your thoughts on that proposal, and or any other ideas you have to help support our child care providers, our families, and our communities? One
of the things I've been listening a lot to is making sure there's a balance between what the center child care model is going to receive and the family child care model is going to receive, because much of greater Minnesota doesn't have center-based models. And when I was working, I used both, and they're both great, and they both serve a different purpose. But we need to make sure when we're doing something for one, it's not at the expense of another, especially for greater Minnesota when family-based models work. So I'm looking a lot at that. I'm also looking at grants that we've done to programs, because we've had fraud. We've had, fraud that's been tied to the child care program. And so I want to make sure that we have accountability. We've been asking a lot of questions on what that looks like so that we don't go down that path again, and make sure that we have a vetting system that makes sense for the state of Minnesota. So when you're growing the state of Minnesota government, when the auditor has said we have noted fraud, and we have, whether it's $100 million or whatever amount that is, it's notable enough to say this is not $1,000, this is not isolated, this is millions of dollars. So my question is, do we have those systems in place before we add new agencies and add more funding to grant programs? And so that's what I'm looking at, the detail right now.
Great. We have another question from a caller. Are there any plans to set aside monies for the ever-increasing natural disasters and other emergencies with the historic snowfalls, and we could foresee some flooding this spring and otherwise, and generally the legislature can respond only when you're in session, and sometimes a special session is called, but any plans to set aside monies for some of those natural disasters and other emergencies?
Well, that was a great bipartisan thing that we did Thursday night before we left session, is we voted unanimously to make sure that we refunded the emergency fund. preparing for the fact that we likely will see record floods again. And we want to be ready in Minnesota. While we could go back to special session, we don't want to be tied up on a natural disaster thing. And so, right now, southern Minnesota is still without power from this storm, I guess probably it was the end of March, but it happens. And so when you have storms like this, we need to have emergency backup. So that was a great bipartisan thing we all voted yes for.
So passed?
Yes.
Signed into law?
Yes, it's going to the Senate.
Already
Yes.
set aside. That is
Yes.
great to hear.
Yes.
We're getting another question from a viewer. Does Representative Zeleznikar support eliminating Social Security tax for all, including millionaires, or for those making $150,000 or less, as the governor has suggested? And so I guess the question pertains to there could be a scale. You could eliminate the entire tax for people, but there could be a scale to say only up to a certain dollar amount. So what's your position on that?
Ultimately my position is you've paid into it once. So how many times do you want to pay for the same thing? If you buy a car, you're going to pay for it twice. What are we going to set up for the system? So my concern is just what are they considering wealthy? So 100,000, 150,000, a lot of people don't think is wealthy anymore. So I get a lot of emails from seniors saying, look, if I make 175,000 and I've already paid that tax. So I think that's where the line is how do we determine that? And so I'm going to be listening and looking at what is going to be best for Minnesota. But if I had my perfect world and my wand, I'd say let's eliminate it in totality.
Okay, great. Well, keep those questions coming. You've had a lot of town halls, as you said, and have been listening around the region when you're back home in the district. What are the issues that are bubbling up in town halls most frequently that you're hearing from your constituents?
I think Social Security tax elimination. I mean, that is a universal thing regardless of party. I hear it all the time from people and wondering about that just because it's been talked about for so long. I think the other thing that people are concerned about is just education, making sure that we have, strong public schools, across the state, that we are, we've been the North Star for education. And so when we're at 30 and 50% proficiency rates, that's really alarming because if you can't read, it's going to be hard to fill out a job application and have success following. So, we're putting a lot of money in the early childhood development, but if it doesn't follow into K through 12, then that investment is not going to end up being a good investment. And so we need to make sure we have all those things in place. So that's it. And then, making sure that we have the Second Amendment is honored. I think that's a big concern. I get a lot of people sending me information on that. They want to make sure we use the laws we have right now before we ever even consider more laws.
Okay. And one of the major laws that we're seeing proposed right now, or a proposal to make a law, is a red flag bill that is being pushed by some in the majority party. What is your position on the red flag bill in specific?
My concerns are just the targeting that happens in this world we're in right now, and when I've talked to a lot of police officers, I get calls from people all across the state, that just want to say, look, some of the things that sound like great ideas have repercussions. And so there's consequences with good intentions, and I believe that the intentions are pure of what people are trying to do. We all want safety, but the issue becomes neighbor to neighbor disputes, and people make allegations, and there's many times people make allegations at workplaces, and there's a lot of effort spent, and so the police are already right now in a workforce shortage. So having the ability to have due process doesn't exist in the red flag law. And so if somebody makes an allegation about you, you don't have that. You don't have any right to defend yourself. And so that's the concern. And we have 72-hour holds in place right now where a judge is involved and a person has due process. And when I talked to police, they said, we arrest people, but they're out the door right away. So we're sending them in through the system, but nobody's being kept as it is. And so I'm just listening and then watching to see how this goes. But that's my concern. I don't think we're using the laws that we have to date.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left and a few more questions, so we're going to try to roll through them here. Though it's a big one right out the gate here. A viewer who's very supportive of this idea is asking, any discussion about health care for all legislation through the Human Services Committee?
I think there's pieces, that would probably fall under that. I think there's so many topics right now at hand that isn't a committee I've been on. I'm not on that committee, so it hasn't been presented on the House floor yet to vote on anything like that. It's been piecemealed on topics: disability groups, assisted livings, nursing homes, and then other aspects of health insurance and funding. And so that's about all I could speak on that. We haven't had that in a bill to date, but nothing is off the table. I don't think that's going to happen this session. If I was, a betting person, I would say that is not something that is the path that probably people are going to want to see happen.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
This caller is concerned on the non-English speakers who will have driver's licenses. And so I guess this is driver's licenses for immigrants. This passed and is signed into law. This viewer is asking, will this change be safe? Do you have any thoughts on driver's license for immigrants?
I hope so. That was a real disappointment because we were trying to have the driver's license look different than the driver's license that we all have. That that would just say not eligible for voting, or be, like if you were not 21, the driver's licenses look different. But that was all voted down for amendments. So now everybody has the same driver's license we have. And so there's a lot of people that have concerns about that from this perspective of voting, of what does this look like. I think the intention is that there would be car insurance and those types of things. And so we'll hope and see how this goes, but they passed it, and so time is going to tell the story on that.
Do you have concerns, though, about it?
My concern was just that it says not eligible for voting, that it would look different because they're not legal citizens. And so that was my perspective, but it didn't get listened and heard.
I know this is your first session, but I'm going to have you procrastinate right at the end here.
Yeah.
Things are moving fast. Do you see the session ending on time, early? Are we still going to go late? Do you have any sense of that right now? What is your hope?
At the pace we're going, we should end early because they are just bringing everything to the table and saying vote, calling the vote and moving it to the Senate. So it could wrap up before May 22nd, and it wouldn't surprise me because they have a trifecta, and so we shouldn't go 1 minute past the 22nd.
Sounds great. Well, I won't hold you to any predictions on that, but it's great to get your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we are out of time. I would like to thank Representative Natalie Zeleznikar for joining us this week. Minnesota Legislative Report will be off next week for the Easter holiday. We'll be back on Sunday, April 16th, when we will welcome more legislators from northern Minnesota to answer your questions. Stay tuned for Almanac North coming up next. For the team at PBS North, I'm Tony Sertich. Have a great evening.